Hi, my name is Bruce Miller, and I'm here to talk about the Achilles heel of the modern records professional, namely case records. This is a huge, huge issue. It's a source of great failure for modern EDRMS projects, electronic document and records management software projects. To put it bluntly, if you don't get the case records properly handled, then you are going to have a failed EDRMS project. It's an absolute lethal point of failure. If you don't get it right, you won't get your EDRMS right. And I honestly believe that if you fail to get this right, it'll take the project down and very likely you with it. And we don't want that to happen. So the whole point of this session is to show you what they are, how to handle them properly, okay? So what are case records exactly? Well, it's all records in a EDRMS are either case records or they are not, okay? And the software, modern electronic record keeping software, demands that you specify that. You simply have to specify for every category or record series in your retention schedule, which of these categories are case records and which are not, okay? So the software demands that you do this. It absolutely demands it. And it treats case records very differently than non-case records. I'll refer to non-case records as administrative records or admin records, okay? So the software will expect a container, some kind of a place to put all the records related to each individual case. It further expects that you define an event date for every case. So the software will force your hand at this. You either get it right or you don't. The software won't make a mistake, but you have to give it the proper instructions, okay? So the vendors, a lot of enterprise content management or ECM vendors get this wrong. They have for many years. They're getting much better at it, but it's still a big weakness. Even some software vendors have gotten this wrong over the years. They pretty much largely have it correct now. We can safely assume they do, but it's still a weakness in that they're not good at it. Some are great at it, some are not too great at it. But it's a huge deal that you have to understand and deploy properly. And IT, this is one matter that IT needs to know about this. You can't hide this inside the records group. You have to take it out, show it to IT and say, look, this is going to have some major impacts on how you deploy your ECM. Now, when I say ECM, I mean enterprise content management, some platforms such as Highland OnBase or Microsoft SharePoint or Documentum or IBM Content Manager, one of these ECM platforms, okay? Because any modern EDRMS is a mix of an ECM platform plus records capability. So I find that over half of all my clients, and to my belief, half of all industry, has at least 60% of their records are case records. So that you cannot miss this, okay? This is essential. So there's really no such thing as a case record per se. A case record is a record that belongs in a case category. So all categories in your retention schedule are either case categories or admin categories. Now, each case is an adventure. Now, the typical classic definition of case records or case activities, which is typically a category or record series, is either a person, a place, an event, or a thing. So what do these all have in common? Well, they all end or die or come to an end. So there's a rhythm to the activity in that the activity is divided into adventures, what I call adventures. Each adventure is a case. Each case has a start date and an end date, okay? So for instance, I'll give you 3 good examples: employment records or employee records, contracts, and projects, okay? Each of them is, each activity is an adventure. So each contract is an adventure with a start and an end date. Each project, similarly, is an adventure with a start and end date. Same with employees. They start and they eventually terminate with the company. So their employee records eventually terminate. Okay? So the disposition rule is triggered by the event date. Okay? So some people would call case records event records or event-based records, which is fine. But as long as you understand them. So there's a couple of key principles here. Number one is that the records of each case or adventure are independent from those of another adventure. I'll give you an example. Let's use contracts. Let's pretend that we issue one contract per month for each month of a year. I'll call the contracts C1 through C12, one per month. So this is a true statement that you have to understand. All the records related to contract C2 in February represent a set of records that are different from and independent of all the records related to, stored by, or utilized by contract C11 in November. Okay, so that illustrates that each case is an adventure with a start and an end date and a set of records that are related to that adventure that are independent from all the other 11 adventures in this case. Okay. Now, here's another, and in principle, the disposition, at disposition time, the record software will destroy all the records of each case at once. That's not a hard and fast rule, but it is a general rule, okay? Now, here's another concept. The participants putting the records into these categories do not know the event dates, okay? That's a little difficult for some people to grasp. So I'm going to use an example. Let's pick 5 engineers. They're going to build a bridge, millions of dollars. They estimate it will take them a year. So 2 months in, I visit them and I separate the 5 engineers from each other and I ask them one question: when will this project end? How many answers, or how many different answers, do you think I'll get among those 5 engineers? I can tell you I'll get 5. So I record them and I come back 10 months later in month 11. There's only 1 month to go, hypothetically, before the bridge is built. A lot of water has gone under the bridge, no pun intended, since then. I ask the same question in the same way. I separate them again and I ask them one more time: when is this project going to end? How many different answers do you think I'll get? Well, I'll get 5 different answers. And if I compare the answers in February with the answers in November, guess what? They won't be similar. They'll be totally different. What does this illustrate? Is that the participants in the adventure or the case never know when it will truly end. Even if we're going to sign a 5-year contract, the contract could be interrupted, it could be canceled, the company could go out of business, it could be renewed. Even if you think you know, you don't know. For example, employee records. When will people terminate? Nobody knows until it happens, right? So that's a hugely important fact that the software has to reflect, okay? So let's pretend, as an example here, that we have 3,000 case categories, okay? We have, or sorry, 3 case categories. We have employee records or employment files, we have contracts, and we have projects. But we have 1,000 of each. We have 1,000 employees, 1,000 contracts, and 1,000 projects. Given that, that means we have 3 record categories, but each containing 1,000 cases, okay? So in total, we have 3,000 cases, even though we only have 3 record categories, okay? So what about the rest, the administrative? Well, let's assume, for example's sake, that we have 800 categories overall in our retention schedule, which is kind of realistic in a busy company of, let's say, 1,000 people or so. 800. If we assume that 60% of those are case records, which is very typical, then that means 480 of the 800 are case categories, leaving 320 as non-case or admin categories. The retention for the admin categories is different. It is based on the document's age. Okay, so the way it works is disposition looks at each document in that admin category, and if they're let's say 10 years or older, they're deleted. If they're 10 years or younger, they're kept. So think of it as a conveyor belt. Each document falls off the conveyor belt one by one as it reaches the predetermined age. So the trigger for the retention is age, whereas the trigger for case records is the event date. So the records are grouped together by case, and when the event date occurs, then the retention period is added to it. That's when it's qualified for destruction. So again, the trigger for admin records is age. The trigger for case records is the event date. In the event of case records, it doesn't matter what the age of the documents is. All that matters is has the event occurred. So a typical retention rule for case records would be termination date plus 5 years, then destroy for employee records, or contract end date plus, or contract end date plus, let's say 10 years for, and then destroy for contract records. Okay, very different from each other. Now, here's the first reality where the case records start to impact the ECM platform. Okay, if we have 1,000 contractors, or sorry, 1,000 contracts, 1,000 employees, and 1,000 projects, then for contracts, the system must challenge the user to specify which of the 1,000 contracts their document is about, right? There's no way around this. So if I happen to have, in reality, 1,000 contracts, which is very normal, then when I put a document into the system, I have to specify which of the 1,000 contracts this document is related to. There's no escaping that mathematical reality. Even if we take records management right off the table, we have to do that. When you think about it, how can we not? Because we can't do this. We can't take a document about a contract, put it in the system, and say, this is about a contract, but I'm not going to tell you which one. It's a secret. That just makes no sense, right? So in our example here, if we have 1,000 contracts, then when the user puts a document into the system and says, this is about a contract, they haven't told us enough. They have to say, which of the 1,000 contracts is this about? Is it related to? And in order for that to happen, the ECM, the SharePoint, Documentum, FileNet, whatever the product is, whatever the ECM platform is, it has to challenge the user and present them with a selection of those 1,000 to choose from, right? There's no way around that. So here's a little illustration. Here we have 250 admin categories, which is quite common in companies that I see. And we have 1,000 contracts, 1,000 employees, and 1,000 projects. That's a total of 253 categories in the retention schedule. So does that mean there are 253 choices that the user has? No, it does not. It means there are 3,250 choices that the user has. There are 250 admin categories, 1,000 possible contracts, 1,000 possible employees, or 1,000 possible projects that this email or document belongs to, right? So mathematically, when a user is trying to classify a document, the document has 3,250 places it can go, not 253, right? If I have a document about contract 707, it's not enough to say this is a document about a contract. I have to say this one is about contract 707. I have to make that choice of which of the 1,000 contracts, okay? If I have a document and it's about contract 707, and I put it accidentally into case 808 or contract 808, is it misclassified? Yeah, it sure is. It's in the wrong contract. It'll be destroyed at the wrong time. So that's a misclassification. So in this simple little example, there were 3,250 different possible places to put this document. That's if it's done correctly, okay? So case categories, when do they occur? Well, each case needs a container to contain the records related to that adventure or that case, right? So the ECM has to somehow present some mechanism to the user to group together the records of each case, okay? When do you create these case categories? Well, as soon as they exist. Somebody has to create them so that users can use them. So if you hire 4 new people and they start on Monday, somebody has to create those 4 new empty containers, 1 for each new employee. If you start 3 contracts, you have to create 3 new contract containers in the ECM, okay? Who does this? Not the users. We like to use the term IMA, Information Management Administrator, someone with the mission, the dedication, the training, and the motivation to create these cases. They will both create the cases and enter the event dates into them when the event dates occur. Users, remember, users do not know event dates. They do not, okay? Now, these case structures are going to hugely affect the repository. What is the repository? Well, the repository is just another word for the ECM, which is just another word for the document management platform, okay? So the cases will have a massive downstream impact on how the ECM is structured and set up, okay? Now, don't forget event dates. If I have 1,000 employees, I have 1,000 employee termination dates. If I have 1,000 contracts, I have 1,000 contract end dates, and similarly 1,000 project end dates. That's a total of 3,000 dates that have to be recorded somewhere so that the electronic record keeping software can look at them, look them up, and say, oh, you're ready to go, right? So you have to record the 3,000 dates somewhere, and you have to make sure that the record software can find them and act on them, okay? So that's your responsibility as a records manager. We have to make these 3,000 dates happen. We have to record them. We have to make sure they're accurate so that we can act on them. The software will work beautifully. Your job is to make sure that you feed it those 3,000 dates. If you're not doing that today, you are not handling case records properly. Now, this is where it kind of comes together here. Here we have an example of 3 cases inside contracts. We have 3 contracts, one with Lovely Landscaping, one for Safety Security, and one for Tasty Catering. Let's pretend that we're going to file or submit, let's say, 100 records for each of these cases over, I don't know, maybe a 3-month period, and maybe 1 or 2 users or more per case. Okay, different people work on different cases, right? So this is what you got to realize is that the metadata that is going to be recorded and collected for each document is now going to be broken into 2 types of metadata: case metadata and document metadata. So let's call the metadata fields, okay? So here we have 7 fields on each document, each record. So the first 5 are shown in orange, and we call those case fields. The last 2 fields, F6 and F7, are document fields. So here's the difference. Case fields are entered by the IMA only. They're entered only at case creation time, which in ECM language means container creation time. Some products, a container is a folder. Some products are libraries. Some other products are document sets. Depends on the brand, but they all have a container concept, okay? A container groups related documents. So once again, these case fields are created by the IMA, not the end users. They're created once and only once. They're created at case creation time, okay? And the values of each of these case fields are replicated across all the documents that come into that case container automatically. That leaves the document fields. The document fields are created by end users. The values, or what they type into those fields, can be different for every document, whereas the orange case fields are the same for every document. So what does this mean at the end of the day? It means that the users don't have to retype anything. For example, if there are 100 records flowing into Lovely Landscaping's case, then we shouldn't have to type the contract name 100 times, or the vendor name 100 times, or the contract type 100 times, right? Only once. The user doesn't need to enter any of the orange case fields. They only need to enter the 2 green document fields, okay? So these are just illustrative examples, but it shows that in a case, a lot of the metadata can be automatically replicated and the users don't need to enter it, okay? Very important concept. So how do these case records influence the ECM structure or layout? That's called information architecture, IA. What is IA? IA is how the ECM is set up, how it's configured. Where do you store your documents? How do you store the documents? What does it look like? How many places are there to store them? Okay. So in a compliant ECM, you have 3 layers: retention schedule on the bottom, the ECM information architecture in the middle, and rules-based record keeping or automated records retention rules on the top. This is what the approach is. The approach is, if you have 800 categories or activities in the retention schedule, then you have 800 places to store documents. Each activity becomes a storage location, a library, folder, what have you, in the ECM. And in the ECM, each of those activities, which is represented with a storage location called a library, each of them will have different metadata, okay? Now, in different products have different names for batches of metadata, but know this: if you have 800 uniquely different activities, then you, by definition, have 800 different unique batches of metadata. The metadata for employee expense reports would be totally different than the metadata for, let's say, vehicle maintenance and repair. You can imagine, right? So that means that each library or folder or container in the ECM will have different metadata, okay? And in different products, they're called document type or content type. Doesn't matter what the product or name is, but there is always a name for what I call a bag of metadata fields. And in this case, I'm going to use the language content type. It's a set of unique metadata. So one retention schedule category equals one library in the ECM, which equals one content type, which is one batch of unique metadata. So here we have 2 categories: safety. The library is called safety, and the content type is called safety, okay? But for case categories, it's a little different. For contracts, we have a library called contracts that equates to the category, but then we have a content type or batch of metadata called contracts. But here's the difference. The library is split into containers, one for each case. In the case of those containers are called cabinets with Documentum. I think they're called document sets in SharePoint. They're called folders in FileNet and other products. It doesn't matter what they're called, but each brand will have a different proprietary name for the containers. But here with contracts, that library will be split into 1,000 containers, one for each document set, one for each case, okay? So in the retention schedule, on our left, we have 320 admin categories. Each one has a retention tag applied to individual documents. right? Conveyor belt. On the right, we have 480 case categories where the retention tag is applied to each adventure or each case. For instance, union grievances. Each grievance might have 10 records, 100 records, 1,000 records, doesn't matter. But that whole grouping will be destroyed 10 years after the end of the grievance or the end of the event, okay? So it's important that in the retention schedule it shows which ones are split into cases and which ones are not. So that's the bottom layer. Now let's move to the middle layer, and you'll see that it's the same kind of structure. We now have 320 libraries or storage locations, and each one now has a batch of uniquely different metadata, okay? On the right, we have 480 libraries, also with a unique batch of metadata, but they're split into a container for every case, okay? So union grievances, if we had 20 union grievances in a given year, there would be 20 case containers, okay? But the same metadata, the same retention rule is applied to each of the cases and subsequently each of the contents of each of the cases, right? So now we have 800 categories in the retention schedule, 800 libraries in the ECM corresponding to the case versus admin. And now let's go to the top layer. Top layer is rules. It's completely invisible to all the end users. The only person who would ever see this is you, and you would build it, and then users would never see it, okay? Here's how it works. You build simple rules that look like this. If the library is employee onboarding, and then the retention could be 5 years. A little more complicated example is our library is operator rounds, but the retention is only supposed to kick in 10 years after it's been approved. So you need a metadata field called approved, okay, in that rule. Down below, we have case rules. So if the library is safety audits, then the retention might be 5 years after the audit end date. And remember, we have 1,000, we might have 1,000 audits, and each one with a different end date, right? So these rules are built in the records management software, not in the ECM software. So now we have our whole system built. We have 800 categories on the bottom, 800 libraries in the ECM, and 800 or more rules written in the background that work automatically, okay? Now, once this is all running, this is how it looks. The rules in the top are dependent on the metadata fields in the middle layer. So the library names and the metadata field names, because often those metadata field names are going to be triggering the retention rules, not the least of which is the event date, okay? So now the top layer in pink is stitched to the middle layer in yellow, which is stitched to the green layer in the bottom, the retention schedule. So this whole system is now stitched together and it works in unison, okay? So you can imagine what would happen if we start tinkering around with metadata fields in the second layer. Well, the rules will break, the system will break, okay? So the idea is you have to have the IT department working with the records management department so that they work together and nobody goes changing anything without consulting the other. Because once it works, it has to stay that way. And if you change it, you can change it as often as you wish, but it has to be a coordinated change across the retention schedule, the ECM structure, and the RBR rules. You have to change all three. If you suddenly have a change or a new business activity, you've got to reflect it in all three, build the rule, and then everything will work automatically, okay? And by the way, the whole purpose of this is so that users do not have to manually classify. They do not have to tell us what documents are records. That's all done automatically in the RBR rules, because we all know It's 2022. We all know this, is that we cannot rely on users to manually classify records or decide what are records and are not, or decide when they become records. That just has never worked in history. It's never going to work in the future. So automation is the only way to go. It's the only way to be successful. And this is how to achieve it. So a little bit of detail about how we make this happen. Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to write up your retention schedule. When you do, you have to explicitly specify, is this activity a case activity or not? Here's how I do it. I write up, here's an example from audits. I specify in writing that it's a case. I specify how each case is to be named, and then I spell out which fields we're going to have as case fields and document fields. Remember, case fields are orange. They're entered by the IMA only once at case creation time, and the values are replicated across all incoming documents. The document fields are the green ones. They're entered by users, not by the IMA, and the values can be different for every single document in the system, okay? So you have to, if you look at the bottom of the screen here, you'll notice that there is it's a fairly sophisticated set of retention rules. But you'll notice that those retention rules call for metadata fields as triggers, okay? So wherever we have a metadata field that's called for by a retention rule, we consider that to be a non-negotiable, mandatory, critical compliance field. You got to have it or you're not compliant. Unlike other fields that are referred to as business fields, which are great for the business, but are not mandatory, non-negotiable compliance fields because they're not called for in one of these retention rules. So what does a retention schedule look like? Well, a modern software-ready retention schedule is a spreadsheet, and it has one row for every category. So in our example here, there's 800 of them. So 480 of them would be marked with a letter C, as you see in the middle of the screen here, awards to city, and it's also in green versus white. Now you can come up with your own nomenclature, but it has to be explicit. The software will not accept it unless it's explicitly told which categories are case categories. So now the only other thing to know here is that you can have some pretty busy activities, and you're going to rely on an IMA to create them. You're also going to rely on the IMA to enter event dates. So how long is this going to take this IMA? Is it going to consume an hour a week, an hour a month, or an hour a day? That's a huge decision. It can be pretty high, especially if one department's IMA is responsible for hundreds of categories. The number can pile up on you pretty quick. And the next thing you know, if you're not careful, you're going to burden the IMA with 4 hours a day of work. There are 7 responsibilities of an IMA in a typical EDRMS. 2 of them are create new cases and enter event dates in cases when they occur. How long will that take? Between 5 and 10 minutes per case. So it's helpful to know how many cases are they going to have to create per day or per week. So in the retention schedule, we track that. We project it, I should say. We project it. And if the numbers look high, then we can react to that. We can say, well, we're going to need more IMAs or something. But we can't expect to burden someone with 7 hours of work a day on top of their existing duties, right? Really, really important. So here's how we do that. This is a tab in a modern software-ready retention schedule, and it has one row for every case category. And in each row, it has, looks like about 12 fields, 12 columns, I'm sorry. And the most important one is projections, case volumetrics. How many cases do we start with? How many do we expect to create per week? And then the spreadsheet automatically calculates what is the total number of hours per year that that person is going to have to contribute, right? So that's why we record an owner. Who's responsible for that case category? Who's going to look after the cases for that? So this allows us to total up the total effort of each IMA, and that's really, really important. So in summary, there are 7 things I had to say about case records to get it right for a modern EDRMS. Number 1 is if you don't get case records handled properly, it will bring down your project and likely you with it. Okay, so be careful of that. Number 2, each category in a modern retention schedule must explicitly specify which ones are case categories. The software can't work without that. And the metadata fields being applied to every document in the system are either going to be case fields or they are not for 60% of the storage locations, okay? So if you do have 800 categories in the retention schedules, and this is going to occur 480 times. In 480 different libraries, you have to specify these are the case fields, these are the document fields. The enterprise content management platform, be it SharePoint, Google Drive, whatever it is you're using, it has to provide containers for each case. Okay, there has to be a logical container, be it a cabinet, folder, document set, whatever the heck it is, there has to be one for every case. And the user must be forced to specify which case the document or record is related to. Okay, so that's, remember the slide with 3,250 different mathematical choices. That's critical. The user can't just put a document in there and say, this is about an employee. They have to say, this is about employee Barney Rubble, right? They have to specify which employee. And yes, that will involve either a drop down or a pop-up or a fly out or some kind of a selection mechanism of 1,000 different users. And if you're large and you have 30,000 employees, then yeah, you've got to choose between 30,000 employees in a pick list. Absolutely you do. This is the point of failure. That this is why Microsoft failed at records management for over 13 years. They didn't get point number 6, which is the participants do not know event dates. So don't even think about asking users when this event is going to occur. They don't know. Only a designated person, such as the IMA, should have the responsibility for entering event dates. So you have to have, in our little example here, you have to have a 3,000 different dates, a place to put them so that the software can act on them. It's your job to do that. It's not the user's job to know event dates because they don't. And finally, remember, when it comes to cases, users use cases. They use them. They put documents in there, but they do not manage cases. They don't create them. They don't worry about event dates because they can't, they won't, they don't want to, they're not qualified. There's a long list of reasons. You have to separate the management of cases from the usage of cases. Users use them. They only do one thing, which is which container do I put it in? Which employee is it? Which project is it? Which contract is this related to? That's all they do. That's enough to ask of them. They can manage that. They'll get that fine. But creating the cases, managing the event dates, not users. You have to designate someone to do that. Okay? So that's it for me. That's what I think you need to do to get case records proper. And if you do get it done correctly, then your EDRMS will be just fine. Thank you very much.